I am currently standing beside two exotic V10 cars that both pack 5-liter V10 high-revving engines, sequential manual gearboxes, and a whole lot of depreciation. There's a lot of similarities and a lot of differences between the two, but the main one being that this costs about $20,000, while this costs nearly 150 grand. Let's find out today. We're gonna see whether it's worth it for the extra money with this, or whether you may as well just go this route. My apologies, everybody. I have not posted it in a long time, but we're back and we've got some seriously cool stuff to go through today. Started a new job with an awesome company called Adrenaline Motors and Adrenaline Exotics, and we have borrowed this beautiful 2006 Giallo Midas Gallardo Spyder to do a little bit of filming today and compare it to this being my 2006 BMW M6 that we've seen on the channel a few times before. The 2006 Gallardo is in absolutely beautiful shape, and this thing is packing a lot of really cool stuff. It's got a 5-liter V10 that revs to over 8,000 RPM, very similar to the M6. It's got a 6-speed sequential manual gearbox as compared to the 7-speed sequential manual gearbox that is in the M6. And ironically, it is supposed to be an all-wheel drive car, but it has actually been rear-wheel drive converted to make it even more similar to the M6. There's a lot of cool stuff between these two cars and a lot of stuff that we can compare, because this has a huge price tag in comparison at approximately $130,000 more value than the M6 does. But that aside, they are incredibly similar. They both make around 500 horsepower. They both have very similar 0 to 60s. This technically has a slightly higher 0 to 60 stock, but with the rear-wheel drive conversion on this, it lightens things up a little bit and should make this a little bit quicker. They feel very similar. I must say, this sounds a little better being the Spyder. You can hear that noise rather than being behind you like it is in this. It's almost like it is inside your head. They both sound fantastic. They're both muffler deleted. This one is catless as well, which makes it sound just absolutely amazing. And they are both absolutely gorgeous. I must say, I think the Lambo looks a little bit better, but does it look $150,000 better? Giving this thing a little bit of a walk around, it's a lot smaller than you'd think. If you've ever seen one of these cars in pictures, they look like they should be a lot bigger than they are, but the reality is it is a very small car. They don't weigh all that much. They're very quick on their feet, and especially with the rear-wheel drive conversion, it definitely reacts a little bit better. In stock form with the all-wheel drive, it's supposed to be a lot harder on clutches and a couple things like that, but it's really light on its feet. The interior is spec'd in this gorgeous black on yellow stitching, and it is in awesome shape for what it is. This car has got approximately 49,000 kilometers on it, and it is in great shape for that. It sounds fantastic, it runs fantastic. It's got a whole bunch of recent maintenance, a couple of goodies, but it is just an absolute blast to drive. This is actually the first Spyder I've ever driven of any sort, and it is so much fun. Up here in Canada, where winters, falls, and springs can be absolutely disgusting, maybe not quite as ideal, but on a nice summer day like this, it is absolutely fantastic. The only things that are upgraded on this car whatsoever is just the stereo has been upgraded to a newer touchscreen deck, along with some of the other audio equipment. The rear-wheel drive conversion, which I've just mentioned, which is pretty much just pull the front drive shaft out, chuck it in the trash, and there you have it. And beyond that, like I say, it's got exhaust work and a catless straight pipe, but besides those 3 items, it is 100% stock. And yeah, she's in great shape. And in contrast, everybody has probably seen this if you've seen my videos before, but this is my super high mileage 2006 BMW M6, and this thing is practically a miracle considering that it has got approximately 210,000 kilometers on it. It's seen a ton of maintenance, and it is a ton of fun. As we've seen in a previous video, I picked this car up in Ontario, where we got it when a Jag did not work out that we were supposed to bring home, and we ended up grabbing this instead. Overall, for the mileage, it is in fantastic shape, and to contrast to the Lambo, it also has a 5-liter V10, it also revs over 8,000 RPM, and it also had an insanely high MSRP when it was brand new in 2006. This thing is not a Spyder, although these were available in a convertible format. This is the coupe with the carbon fiber roof, that is absolutely gorgeous. I think the coupes look much better for these cars. And of course, when I was looking, there wasn't really any convertibles for sale, but that's okay because this is what I would have preferred. Ironically, it also has approximately the same 500 horsepower that the Lamborghini has, and it feels very, very similar to drive, with a few key differences being mainly tied to the fact that the Lambo is a Spyder versus the coupe in terms of how it sounds and how it drives. You can definitely tell that the Lambo hooks up better, having the engine and the weight of the engine over the rear wheels versus the front engine layout that this has and the rear wheel drive. This thing likes to light up tires like nobody's business, whereas this likes to hook up and boogie. But aside from those things, these are incredibly similar cars, even down to the same displacement, the same transmission layout, and a lot of these other things. Especially considering there isn't many single clutch manual transmissions that have been put in a lot of cars, but these both came from that era and are both one of the variants that did end up getting a SMG style transmission. In the Lamborghini, they call it E-gear, but it is the same setup. It is quite literally a manual transmission in every sense, just there is a robotic / hydraulic mechanism that does all your clutching and all your shifting, which means they shift really slow compared to a newer DCT, but on the flip side, they are incredibly dramatic and super, super pleasurable to drive. All right, enough chit chat. Let's hop in the Lambo and go for a drive. Off we go in the Lambo. There's a few cool things for sure that this has got to offer. Like I was saying before, since the engine is behind us, this thing sounds absolutely phenomenal, especially with the aftermarket exhaust setup. It goes pretty damn good. It is set up with approximately a 4.3 0 to 60 time, which, believe it or not, is slightly slower than the M6. Not by much, but just a little bit. It definitely hooks up better though. You can feel the acceleration more in this because the engine is over the rear wheels, being that this is a rear mid-engine car. You get a lot more reaction out of it. But let's see here. We'll pull out and get you guys a little bit of sound. Give you guys a little bit of sound here. This thing sounds so magical. It's insane. It sounds a lot like the M6 in a lot of contexts. The main difference being though, with this being a Spyder, it feels like it's inside your head rather than way behind you. But no, this thing has a lot of cool stuff to offer. It is really small in here. Like, it's good that this is a Spyder, because if this was a coupe, a guy kind of starts to run out of headroom. If you're anything taller than like that 5'9", 5'10" range, these cars start to get really uncomfortable to drive with the top up or with the roof in a coupe. But this is not too bad, and being that we are in the Spyder, we've got tons of headroom and tons of space. This thing drinks fuel like crazy. The M6 is no better, but these naturally aspirated V10s have a massive drinking problem, which is just kind of part of the equation. It's not really something a guy can do all that much about, but it is a miles per gallon car, not a miles per gallon car, that is for sure. And I don't know, when a guy starts comparing it to the M6, it really depends on what a guy's after, because I do think this has so much sexier looks by a long shot. This, you can't drive this thing anywhere without heads turning, without phones coming out windows. Everybody loves to see a bright yellow Lamborghini. There's no doubt about that. And it commands attention. When you drive around in the M6, it does not get the attention anywhere near like this does. Guy has to be careful driving this around because you'll be late everywhere you go. You just end up having conversations with everybody, and everybody wants to know what the details are, where it came from, and a whole bunch of ridiculous things because, of course, it is a Lamborghini. I think it's so much fun to drive. I will say, it took me a minute to realize that this was even a rear-wheel drive conversion. When I was looking at the car in my shop back at home, I noticed that there was no front drive shaft in and therefore nothing going to the front wheels, but just driving it around, you do not realize that it is not all-wheel drive like it came from the factory. This thing hooks up and boogies so good, and there is no issues whatsoever with traction, whereas the M6, if you get after it even a little bit, you grab a gear, and especially in the harsher shifting modes, you'll just light up the rear end and you won't get anywhere anytime fast. Whereas this, you do not have issues with that whatsoever. You get in, you go, and it is ready at all times with good traction that'll keep you safe and straight. This thing has tons to offer too. The main thing though being that all of this stuff I'm talking about, it all comes together to form a cohesive picture that is just insane. There is just something about driving this. Spec for spec, this thing is so comparable to the M6. It is very similar to drive. It makes very similar power. As they sit, they're both rear-wheel drive. They're both 5-liter V10s. They're both naturally aspirated. They both rev to the moon and sound amazing. But at the end of the day, there is something that is just incredibly special about this car. I don't know how to describe it. I don't know how to put my finger on it because there isn't really an easy way to do so. But it just, the handcrafted Lamborghini-ness of it, which is both its biggest downfall as far as just how it is to live with, is also its biggest upside because it makes it oh so special. Despite the fact that this and the M6 are incredibly similar, other than just the way they feel to drive, there is some noticeable differences for sure. This thing, being how much smaller it is so much lighter on its feet, and it is 100% noticeable when you drive it. The M6 is a big car, and between the engine being in the front on that car, not in the back, and the additional size, this thing handles noticeably much better. And this thing also doesn't handle low speeds as well. They're both SMG cars, like we said, so they are both single clutch automated manuals, but this one is so much clunkier than the M6. The M6 is really clunky at slow speeds compared to most stuff, but this is much clunkier compared to that. Let's see here. But this is much clunkier in comparison to that. It really doesn't like to go slow. The clutch is not smooth. The gear changes are not smooth at slow speeds. This thing is absolutely terrifying in a parking lot. Moving forward, it is really jumpy. It's really jolty. Same thing in reverse. But as soon as you get this thing going, it is so much smoother than the M6. The M6 at low speeds does much better and shifts much harsher at high speeds, whereas this is the opposite, which makes it feel a little bit more special in some ways. The M6 is more dailyable, it's smoother to drive, it's simpler to drive at low speeds around town if you're trying to get into a tight parking space, but this is so much more special to drive if you really let it sing. And on that note, let's go back, we're gonna hop in the M6 and see how we find that as compared to this. Huge thank you to Tyson and Barry at Adrenaline Exotics for letting us take the Lambo out to go have some fun. But now we are out for a drive in the M6, and you guys have seen this car before, but we are still gonna go for a little bit of a drive and talk about some of the differences / how much fun this car is for the price that it costs. You guys might or might not really be able to tell on camera, this thing is just way rowdier. It's interesting because since this doesn't keep traction, it makes driving this thing a little bit more terrifying. On top of the fact, like, the shifts being harsher as a guy gets to speed than the Gallardo, this thing, it's nowhere near as smooth, it's nowhere near as graceful, but it is very similar in speed, and it does sound very similar as well. As I mentioned before, this thing is much more bigger, it's much bulkier, but we do have back seats, which is something we don't have in the Lambo. It is a little more comfortable if you were going for a long drive or gonna be spending a lot of time in here. This would be by far the choice to make, but as far as going to play around, have a little bit of fun, if you were doing a track day or something like that, I think the Lambo is just that much more special. It's one of those things, if you're gonna be spending the money on a V10 car like this, I don't know what the way to go is, because there is a special occasion to the Lambo, and there is something that this just doesn't touch. Even though spec for spec and to drive, the performance is very similar, they're also incredibly different just in the way they feel, the way they look, the kind of attention they command. It's pretty crazy because if we look at what they cost new in 2024 dollars, so accounting for inflation, because they're both 2006 cars, this is actually a pretty lateral comparison, but this was approximately half of the price of the Lambo. still incredibly expensive and still incredibly depreciated, but new in 2024 dollars. I've mentioned in videos before, this was a little bit over 150,000 2024 dollars in 2006, whereas the Lambo was just under 300 in 2006. Both cars being incredibly expensive, but also if you were the guy buying a new V10 car in 2006, these very well might have both been on your radar. They're similar enough in what they are, it's just more sports car versus more grand touring car. They're both incredibly quick, they're both incredibly fun to drive, but I don't know, it's very, very weird how similar yet different they are in what they are. Either way, they're both an absolute blast. The M6, I've got a little more experience with, I've played around a little bit more with. It is more fun to be a bit of a hooligan in, since you can kind of light up the rear end, play around with no traction, and have some fun being an idiot. Whereas the Gallardo, it's not really made for that. It is a very hooligan-ish car in the way it sounds and the way it acts, but it just doesn't have the same lose the rear end, slide around, kind of play with it feel. But that's okay. That's not what it's meant for. It is meant to go incredibly fast in a straight line and grip the road incredibly well going through curves, and it does what it's supposed to so well in comparison to this. Comparing the markets of the two cars though, this is a very poor example. It's in very good shape, but it has super high mileage. If you wanted a more equivalent example with similar miles to the Gallardo, to buy one of these with around 50,000 kilometers on it, you're probably looking more in the $40,000 to $50,000 range. So it does bring the price tag up a little better to compare to the Gallardo. But even at that point, if we did have a good direct comparison between the two cars, that's still a $100,000 difference for the Gallardo versus this. And I guess it really just comes down to what you want out of one of these cars. And I mean, if you have the money to spend, personally, if I had the money to spend and the money was not a piece of this equation, it would be, without a doubt, I would be buying the Lambo. Just taking the two for a day, if I was grabbing the keys for one or grabbing the keys for the other, the Lambo all day, every day, it feels so much more special. But when you account for the fact that this costs super cheap, I don't know where that exactly falls. Because this, by far, the power you're getting, the driving experience you're getting for the amount of money spent, these are really hard to beat. And there's reason for that. As I've talked about in videos before, these things are incredibly depreciated because although they are both very expensive cars to work on, the Gallardos are generally known to be relatively reliable. There isn't too much that goes wrong, too many massive failure points. You need to do clutches every once in a while with the E-gear system, and the E-gear system can be a little bit of a pain, whereas on these cars, rod bearings are a maintenance item. The SMGs are a lot more failure-ridden than the ones in the Lambos. We need to do throttle body actuators, you need to do the Vanos pump, the Vanos lines, and about 72 other really expensive things that mean, since this isn't that exotic of a car, at least in comparison to the Lambo, they depreciate a ton, you know? This was meant to be a luxury car, and if you're looking to buy a luxury car, you can probably just go and buy a new one. If you're the kind of person who can afford to pay a shop to keep one of these cars running, you're probably the kind of person who can afford payments on a nice new car with warranty. Whereas you get more into the sports car segment where the Gallardo falls, it holds its value better because the kind of person who wants a Gallardo Spyder wants a Gallardo Spyder. They don't want the newer version, or maybe they might and can't afford it, but generally speaking, they want exactly what they're getting, whereas with this, most people give up and want something newer and more luxurious and more updated. So, I don't know, these two cars are incredibly similar. It has been an absolute blast driving the pair of them. It's so hard to describe the differentiation between the two, how similar they are, yet different they are, but they are both incredibly special in their own right. They're both incredibly fun to drive, and they both sound absolutely awesome. And there we have it. That is two completely different yet incredibly similar exotic V10 cars. We've got the Gallardo on the very expensive end of the market and the M6 as kind of the grand touring car on the very cheap end of the market. They definitely have a lot to offer, both in their own individual ways. Let me know down below which one you think is better. Are you thinking more the cheap version being the M6, but the expensive side of things being the Gallardo. I'd love to know what you guys think down below. But we are back here at Adrenaline Exotics. We've got the Lambo back parked all beautiful in its home here where it is going to stay. I can't thank Tyson and Barry enough for letting me take this thing for a few days. We did a couple events, had some fun, and got to do a little bit of comparing between this and the M6, which worked out absolutely perfect. It was a ton of fun. I'm super stoked about the new opportunities. I have just recently started working here, and this is Adrenaline Exotics here in Red Deer, Alberta. We've also got our location in Sylvan Lake that is Adrenaline Motors, and our location in Carstairs that is also Adrenaline Motors. And they do not deal as much in this stuff, but in a lot of nice stuff as well. Trucks, cars, sports cars, muscle cars, all of those kind of things. We do a lot of buying, a lot of selling, and I am so stoked to see what is to come with that. Thank you guys so much for watching today. We are gonna be making more videos. There is so much yet to come, and there's lots more cool stuff like this that is gonna be coming at you guys. Thank you. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.